Do you think that we have a list of things that we look for in our partners and that we expect to be able to tick those off?
Yeah, 100%. We numb because we don't want to feel anything. Because I just remember thinking I can just numb the bad bits.
Yeah.
But what I actually numbed was any joy. And I used to get to the end of the day and I just used to think, I've got nothing left. There is literally nothing left.
Particularly if you've been in a relationship for a long time and you're just feeling uncomfortable, but you can't put your finger on what it is that isn't right.
Yeah.
How do you start to work through that? Welcome to Life, Love and the Law, a podcast by Stowe Family Law. My name is Liza Gatrell and today I am joined by Kate Nestor, divorce coach. We're going to be talking about, is it normal to feel unsure even if the relationship looks good on paper? So Kate, welcome to the podcast. Do you want to start by just introducing yourself to the listeners?
Of course, yeah. So I'm Kate and I have a combined role where I head up the brand and content team at Stowe Family Law, and also I am a trained and practicing divorce coach. So it's absolutely lovely to be here today because we've been working together behind the scenes on the podcast since our London trip in 2020. So it's really nice to actually step out from the little back room in the podcast studio and kind of come and talk to you about the work that I've been doing in the divorce coaching space. So quick potted history. I started working at Stowe in 2018. Unfortunately, my long-term relationship with the man that I have my children with ended in 2019. And my idea when I started at Stowe was always to really start to bring in more holistic conversations about divorce. The work that we were doing at that time was very legally heavy, which is incredibly important. But as you know, with your clients, divorce affects every area of life. It's not just a legal process. I started some webinars in 2020, then obviously started doing the work on the podcast and then reflecting on my own experience and how I probably would have dealt with it very differently if I'd had the right support at that time. I decided to retrain to be a divorce coach in 2023. And when I'm telling people I'm a divorce coach, it's really interesting. So I get two main responses. One is, that sounds really interesting. And the second is, what is that? Like, what do you actually do? So I've got very good at sort of my little rehearsed answer to that. So in a nutshell, a divorce coach will kind of bridge the gap between the legal and the financial information. So I'm there for the emotional stuff. I'm there for the practical stuff. I'm there to help people sort of understand the process. And I think my background, having sort of nearly 8 years now in family law, having my own personal experience and obviously having my coaching experience now, means that I can give people a sort of really intuitive, really flexible approach. I work very, very much led by the client. So I always say to clients in kind of the first meeting, I'm here to help you. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to help you understand the process ahead of you and how to make those decisions. I also work across the whole spectrum. So people are always surprised to hear that I actually work with a lot of people that are in this situation, that sort of come to me and say, do you know what? On paper, this is fine, but I'm not happy. I mean, do you ever see that? Do you ever see sort of clients come at that stage or?
We get a lot of clients that come in to initial meetings that have not separated.
Right.
And it can often be the worry of, I kind of feel that something's not right.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's the end or not. But I'm worried if it is the end, what would that impact be?
Yeah.
And so they just want to know, what actually would a divorce look like? Would I be okay after a divorce?
Yeah,
so that they can then kind of reflect on it and then make a decision as to whether or not they feel the relationship is right and should continue.
Yeah.
So that's not uncommon, and we don't always see those clients again. So it's not a foregone conclusion that because you have taken that advice, then you're down that sort of track. Some of them will reconcile and the relationship will be going hopefully for a long period afterwards.
Yeah. And I think this kind of podcast will hopefully help people, maybe even a little bit before that, but kind of having those sort of like moments of doubt.
Yeah. We have all watched certain programs on television where the sort of the saying like looks good on paper is now really sort of well known. Do you think that we in a modern society have a list of things that we look for in our partners and that we expect to be able to tick those off?
Yeah, 100%. I was reflecting about this in kind of like preparation for the podcast. modern society nowadays, I mean, all generations have had difficult society, difficult situations to deal with. But I think personally for me as well, it's the pressure nowadays. It's the curated Instagram reels. It's the, it's like people look at people's sort of edited highlights of their life and feel that that's the whole thing. Whereas actually relationships are messy. They're human and they can be really messy at times. We're quite complex creatures, aren't we? When we love in different ways and we feel in different ways. So yeah, very much so. And I do sometimes see that in the coaching space as well, where people will be like, we've got the money, we've got the house, we've got the kids, I've got the car, all this kind of like materialistic stuff. And actually when we drill down with people like that, it's like, but are you happy? Is that what, is that giving you what you need and what you value? And I think it's very easy to look at other people's lives and think, oh, they've got it all sorted. And actually, you and I work with people who probably have very highly curated Instagram feeds, but we know actually the reality is that life isn't always sorted like that.
No, I think actually from doing the work that I do, that has massively meant that I don't like to keep up with the Joneses
100%.
in the same way.
Yes, completely.
Because, someone might be driving a very nice car and they might have a very nice house and it might look absolutely perfect from the outside, but I have done enough divorces that when we dig down into the finances, that can be actually have a significant amount of debt and stress and all of these things actually that have kind of, you just don't see on the surface.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, I also think as well, sometimes I mean, obviously I don't look at my clients' social media. That would be completely, but I can hear with the way that they're talking about their lifestyle that actually sometimes they're not comfortable with the amount of debt or they're not comfortable with how it's coming together. And you sometimes find actually that one person leads that a little bit more. One person is maybe perhaps more materialistic or wants to keep up with the Joneses. I mean, you and I have both got children. We've done the school playground for a long time. We know how competitive that place can be. And I think it's really hard, isn't it, when you've got it on social media and then you've got that kind of almost that live action edited reel in the school playground, I mean, I know you work full time and I've always worked full time. I was not the mum at the bake sale with the homemade biscuits.
No, shop bought.
I was the mum that was in the
playground.
co-op on the school run trying to get the biscuits and the kids to school on time. So I think my own personal experience and also working with other people and working with Stowe, I've realised that actually I've removed myself a lot more from that. So now, for example, Mother's Day as a single parent can be difficult as a mother. So I don't go on social media. I have a wonderful relationship with my children. I have a wonderful relationship with my ex, but sometimes that can sort of make me feel a little bit of a failure. And I think to myself, actually, no, just don't look at it, because I've got friends who might put this perfect picture on. And I know they had to go for a walk and a cry because it was a disaster, So, it's interesting that we both see that, isn't it? Do you find that with your colleagues as well?
I just think people tend to, as you say, you only put the highlight stuff out. You only put the really great stuff out. You don't say, had an argument with my husband last night. You don't say, had a really stressful week at work last week. You don't, all of the horrible stuff that goes on for absolutely everybody because nobody has a perfect life.
Yeah.
Doesn't get put out there. What we have is this highlight reel on all of the social media platforms. And then we have film and TV where predominantly it's all very sort of romanticized and wonderful and all these kind of lovey-dovey feelings, which can then, if you're in a relationship, and particularly if you've been in a relationship for a long time and you're just feeling uncomfortable, but you can't put your finger on what it is that isn't right. Yeah. How do you start to work through that?
It's really difficult. And I think it's quite common as well. And I think you kind of pointed it out before, just because you have that uncertainty doesn't mean that your relationship is over. We're all on the hamster wheel. Whether you've got children or not, it doesn't make any difference. We've got these incredibly high-paced, high-pressured lives. And I think it's really easy as a couple to really kind of just get on that wheel and just keep going. And you pop your head up and you're like, oh, God, it's Christmas again. But what can happen within that is that disconnection starts to build and you start to lose that connection with each other. And for me, that really is where that uncertain feeling comes from, is actually somebody feeling that disconnect. So nothing feels right and therefore it starts to manifest. I had a client a while ago when I first started coaching and she'd waited 18 years.
Oh, okay, like a really long time
Really, really long time. She'd felt uncertain for 18 years. So, I mean, from my own personal experience, I ended my relationship with my ex. And I think the uncertainty is really not the hardest part because obviously there's lots of things that kind of come and happen after that. But the uncertainty is really, really difficult because you don't want to feel like that. So I did everything in my power to stop feeling it. But what I did by doing that was I made myself numb. And when you make yourself numb, you can't deal with anything.
Yeah.
I always used to say to myself, if I stop feeling it, then it's not real. And it won't be real. Now, that had a huge detrimental impact on my mental health and how I felt about myself. And I always remember at the time, I felt very, very small. I was having chronic panic attacks. I was incredibly anxious because I knew inside of myself that I wasn't living a life that was right. I knew my relationship wasn't right. And for him as well, you know, I didn't love him in the way he deserved to be loved. And we were just living completely separate lives. You know, he exercised all the time. I exercised all the time. I went out with my friends. He went out with his friends. He was away with work a lot. I was at home with 2 children. You know, it's that real sort of, and the uncertainty was so difficult. So when I'm working with clients, I totally get that uncertainty. And what I've done in my practice is kind of thought to myself, what did you need someone to say to you at that point in time? How could someone have helped you explore that feeling? And that to me is actually, in a nutshell, how to deal with the feeling of uncertainty. You've got to face it head on. You've got to feel those emotions. I dug, you know, buried. I'm fine. Ended up having a huge panic attack in the doctors, ironically. And actually, that was the start of the process for me of going, do you know what? I'm actually not fine. Now, obviously, that thinking beforehand is sort of like, I just wish I'd kind of had the insight to actually just take a step back and actually look at my emotions. Our emotions tell us everything we need to know, to be honest with you. They're great guides to what's going on. So what I do with a lot of clients, particularly in this phase, is we'll sort of set up an emotions diary. Sounds a bit sort of tweet, you know, a bit woo-woo, doesn't it? But it doesn't have to be a sort of diary and a pen. It can just be a general kind of thought process. There's loads of apps out there now that you can use to kind of log how you feel. And I think for me, it's like, start to really get curious, start to explore what are you feeling? And there's lots of things out there, emotional wheels that you can use if you're finding it difficult. But what are you actually feeling? When do you feel it? What is happening in your relationship? So I was incredibly lonely. Even though I had loads of friends and a very full life, I was lonely. And I was lonely because we'd disconnected. At times I felt really discomfort in my body. I now realise that I was actually on the edge of change. And my body was saying to me, come on, you need to start feeling this stuff. We need to start to actually recognise the elephant in the room, the uncertain feeling. Now, for some people, some clients that I've had, actually, they've kind of gone away and actually looked at what needed working on in their relationship. Unfortunately, by the time I came to that, it had kind of gone too far. And well, talk later in the kind of podcast about kind of like disconnection turning to sort of disinterest, basically. But, you know, when I know if someone comes to me, if they are still empathetic, they still care, they still want to fix it, then I'll often refer them and say, look, go home, try and have a conversation about it, explain how you feel, and then maybe take up counselling or something like that. But I think that for people is just really get under the skin of how you actually feel. What is that telling you? And it might be different, but it might be that actually what it's telling you is that actually there is some things that you can work on.
That's really challenging though, isn't it?
Super challenging.
Like getting into emotions.
Really difficult.
And I would imagine that, you know, when you start to kind of feel those emotions, it then involves having to have really difficult conversations potentially with your partner. You know, is this something that you should be broaching with your partner? Is this something you should be working on like yourself first before you have those conversations? What would you advise around that?
I would always say work through it yourself, because sometimes we can start conversations and we don't want the outcome that happens, but the conversation has started. So I think it's very much more about taking some time, really reflecting on who you are, what you want, what do your future want to be. And there's loads of online tools that you can do about visualization. And I work very visually with clients. I take my time with this with clients because it takes a lot of bravery to actually open up and to actually start to challenge how you feel. So I would say with everybody in this process, baby steps. I mean, I think you have a lovely kind of way of describing the divorce process. You know, we take a step. We don't take a million steps. You know, it's a marathon, not a sprint. We don't, you know, and this is very much, you know, sometimes I'm working with people And I myself had been in that relationship for 20 years. I'd been in that relationship at that point for probably half my adult life. You know, we travelled together, we had children together. Our lives were, I'm sure you and your husband are the same, you know, our lives were so intertwined. But the uncertainty for me didn't go away. And actually, to be honest with you, with me, my body started to tell me, I started to get really sick. I had chronic throat infections. I was in hospital. I had chronic panic attacks. I lost so much weight. So in the end, it was almost like my body and my brain was like, you have to deal with this.
You have to do something.
Yeah, you have to do something about it. And as I said just a minute ago, that's not for everybody. Not everybody is in that situation. But I do think that's the other side of kind of exploring your emotions is also look at what's happening with you and your body at that time as well. You know, how do you feel? How is your health? How is your mental health? You know, because when we numb because we don't want to feel anything. Because I just remember thinking I can just numb the bad bits.
Yeah.
But what I actually numbed was any joy. That really had its toll on me. And it's only now, I mean, hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? You know, I look back now and think, my God, like, how did I not see it? But I didn't see it. And I think that's why I'm so passionate now about helping people in this phase. I think it's quite an under-supported phase that people go through because obviously they don't want to say it out loud. So why would they, they want to? And that loneliness can be really, really difficult.
And I think there's a worry, I suppose, that if you say it out loud, you put yourself on this pathway that you genuinely don't know whether that's the pathway that you want to be on that stage. And I suppose there must be a degree of kind of backwards and forwards in this period.
Very much so.
What would you say to somebody who was in that situation and wasn't sure what they were doing and, you know, they keep changing their minds and going backwards and forwards? How do you break that cycle?
That's really difficult because I think we do have a tendency then to almost overthink and our thinking almost becomes like a loop, like a constant loop, and we can't break it. First of all, what I would say to people is, A, don't be hard on yourself. None of this is linear. Unfortunately, because as I said before, humans are messy. This is not a neat little process that you're going to go through. I mean, like you say, you know, you can speak to somebody, you never see them again. You can speak to somebody and it's 3 years later that they come back. Because our lives are so entwined together, particularly when you've been together for a long time. So I always say to people, look, it's not going to follow something set. And it's back to that tapping into how do you feel? So if you can tap into your emotions, then you can learn to understand them. And I think once we label our emotions, they become less scary. And I often say to clients when we're further into the process, just track and look for patterns and understand. And that helps them then understand that actually they will jump from one thing to the next. You know, I mean, I'm sure you know, because we've covered it on podcasts before, divorce is often referred to as via the grief cycle. Well, I haven't met anybody yet, and I'm sure you haven't, that has slowly and neatly fit itself through every stage of the, I mean, it's the grief sort of maze scattergun approach.
You go up a bit, you come back down, go a bit further, come back again. Yeah.
And within that time, you're trying, aren't you? You know, my client that had waited 18 years had tried and tried and tried and tried. And it wasn't necessarily that she didn't love him. She actually loved him deeply as a person, but the marriage just wasn't right anymore. So have no expectations and understand again that it's a long process. And I think when you are in that process, I think people can be incredibly hard on themselves. I often say to clients, and I wish someone had said this to me as well, you can make a decision to not make a decision. You don't have to do it straight away. It's back to maybe expectations that we need to walk through life making all these amazing decisions all the time. But a decision this big deserves the time and effort that you want to give it.
And I think you can have expectations from other people as well.
Oh,
so
God,
like, I'm really worried about what my mum's going to think, my dad's going to think, what's his parents going to think, what are my friends going to think? And that in itself creates a huge amount of pressure, which then you become this kind of, you were talking like it was bleeding out in physical symptoms. Like you become this pressure pot almost.
Yeah, you do. You feel like you could explode.
Yeah.
Now I have a very good relationship with my mum, so I did talk to her sort of not that early in the process. She knew there was something wrong anyway, as mums do, you know, she knew. I remember the first time I told a friend and I literally was like, I still remember that breath that I took in. Now, I was very lucky. My family were very supportive. My friends were very supportive. Not everybody has that. I'm an adult child of divorce. My parents separated when I was in my late 20s. My mum had been through it, really understood it. My dad had been through it. My sister had had relationship stuff as well. So from a family perspective, a friend perspective, lots of support out there. The person that was hardest on me was actually myself. And I think my own expectations of what I thought my life was going to be was actually one of the most difficult things to deal with. Because we do have these expectations, you know, we had a beautiful home, we had holidays, you know, we were not living the life as such, but we had a nice lifestyle. I had 2 beautiful children, you know, everything was good on paper. And that expectation of it and that expectation for that's what my life would be. But then I just used to remember I would be like stood in the kitchen and I just used to think I could just scream. And it's only now that I look back, I think that surely that was a sign that maybe you needed to do something about this. But you don't, because you go on autopilot, you stay on the wheel and you have that expectation of what your life should be. I'm from an affluent town. None of my friends are separated.
Okay.
They are all with their partners.
Yeah.
Now, my friends were brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But there was that expectation as well that sort of I was going to be the first person that kind of broke that. I was from a group of friends, we'd all hung around together for a very, very long time. We had relationships spanning back 20 years. So yeah, I would say people will always have expectations of how you should live your life. The problem is that we also have a lot of expectations about how we should live our lives. And actually expectations is something that I work a lot with people around coaching, is when you do feel, and this can be back to the kind of exploring the uncertainty of it. You know, when you do feel disappointed by your partner, I say to clients, just take a step back and say, how did I expect them to behave? What did I expect to happen? Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't be treated well. I'm not saying that at all. We shouldn't put up with stuff like that. But I think sometimes, and again, it's back to social media, sometimes our expectations become quite off track with actually the reality of life.
Yeah.
Every Valentine's Day is not going to be
50 red roses.
50 red roses. It's not. One year it might be some tulips from the garage on the way home. But your relationship is more than that. Your relationship is not about basically a marketing gimmick day. It's about getting under the skin of your own expectations of what you expect your life to be and what you expect your relationship to be. Because if we're with somebody that never meets our expectations, we will constantly be disappointed because they're not mind readers. So they don't know that actually Valentine's is no go for us unless we get 50 red roses. As far as they're concerned, they're really busy and actually they thought the tulips were lovely and they were thinking of us as they picked them up, you know, so it's that misalignment, I think, in relationships.
And the communication, ultimately, like, are 100%. We communicating? Because like you say, if this is what my expectation is, I don't know, I get home from work and I expect because they were at home that they'd empty the dishwasher, whatever, that's a petty thing, but,
no, but
whatever it might have been, if we just complain to ourselves and get ourselves really angry and worked out, but we've never communicated that. How do they know that that's something that is upsetting us? It comes down to that there's a lot talked about. It's not necessarily on our cards for today, but there's a lot talked about the mental load within relationships and how that can be really shouldered sometimes by one party. And the other party's like, oh, you know, I want to help more. Just like, let me know. Like, give me a list. No, because if I give you a list, I'm still the one having to think about it and do it and all of the rest of it. But equally, sometimes we need to give our partners the opportunity to carry some of that mental load for us. You know, again, it comes down to kind of how we're brought up. And, you know, we were told, you know, in our generation that now you can kind of have everything. You can have the house, you can have the children, you can have the really successful career. But actually something has to give or somebody has to come up to help carry that.
100%. And also as well, like, having it all comes at a huge price, you know, trying to have everything that the challenges and everything that we face and everything that we're expected to do, you know. And I think that is changing in terms of gender. I think historically women definitely took the mental load. I think, you know, as women kind of, you know, work more and everything else, I think that has changed. But I think my experience looking at my own friends is that it's very much the woman that takes that mental load. And like you say, it's not about even doing it. It's about knowing what needs to be done. So where's football training? What's Cubs pickup? Who's doing tea? Who's messaging the childminder because you're going to run late from work? Or who's doing the nursery run? I remember I used to get, when my children were little and my ex used to work away a lot, and I used to get to the end of the day and I just used to think, I've got nothing left. There is literally nothing left. I'd have a glass of wine, some cheese and biscuits, and then I'd get up in the morning and we'd go again.
Yeah. I mean, I joke that I need a PA just to run the school emails.
Oh God, what?
Like I have, this year my two youngest are actually in the same school, but last year I had 3 children in 3 separate schools because I had infant, junior and senior school.
Oh no.
And then the level of emails that used to come through from that with all sorts of different activities and days in and trips and all of the rest of it. And it's like, how do you
do
have time to manage all of that?
It's like a WhatsApp group becomes like a part-time job, like a class WhatsApp group.
I had to leave.
Oh, I don't blame you. To be fair, I have had sort of a few sort of looking through my fingers moments at some real passive-aggressive argument taking place about like bake sale or something like that. But yeah, I often used to just mute the notifications on that. And my daughters are not much older now, but they're 17 and 14, so thankfully I don't have to worry about that. But then that brings its own set of challenges because then that's parenting teenagers by yourself as well. So, but I think definitely the mental load. But I think you're completely right in that you can't expect someone to do something or to know something if you don't ask for it or you don't tell them. Because just as much as we're not mind readers, our partners are not mind readers either. And you're right, that can be really difficult, because sometimes, it's not just a difference in mental load. Sometimes people think they're doing loads and actually they're doing about 5% of what actually needs to be done. Yeah. But then I think that's back almost to sort of examining your expectations. Are you only letting them do 5%? Now, look, some people are just lazy. They'll just do 5% whatever you do. But actually, sometimes it can be more of, particularly if you're kind of feel uncertain, but you still feel that you want to rebuild that connection. That can be a really good place to start, to sort of get a babysitter if you've got children, or go out for a drink or go for a walk. Sometimes talking and walking is really good because you haven't got that kind of like face-to-face stuff. And just sort of say, look, I really need some help. Most people, some people aren't, but most people are empathetic and very caring. And actually, I'm sure when a client comes to you and when a client comes to me and says, I really need some help, I really want to help them. And sometimes the person that we're with is the hardest person to ask for that. Takes a bit of courage.
Yeah,
it does take a lot of courage.
I think it takes a lot of courage to have those really challenging conversations, particularly when you don't know how the other person's going to react. Yeah. And if you're already in this kind of fight or flight response, you're really stressed, anxiety, and then you're having to sit down with somebody that you don't know how they're going to react. Yeah. You don't know if they're going to work with you or whether they're just going to go, well, that's it,
Oh, fine, let's split up. Yeah, you just don't know.
And you think, oh my goodness, like I've pressed the button on it without even intending to press the button on it. Yeah. That's really, really challenging. But it's being able to work through that, I suppose. And that's where you come in, or a divorce coach or therapy, like being able to really work through that. Is that what you felt like, reflecting back with hindsight, that was missed? If you'd had, I don't know, somebody to talk to, do you think perhaps you would have been able to work through that a little bit sooner?
Yeah, I genuinely do, actually. And look, don't get me wrong, we're in a great place now. He's brilliant. He's one of my closest friends. He's my daughter's dad. We've got a lovely relationship with our children. I don't want to use the word success story because that doesn't feel the right word, but, we've worked through it, and actually, in hindsight, it was the best thing to do. We're both much happier. But yeah, I really wish that I'd had a safe place to actually express how I feel. Because what you've just said is completely true. The minute the words come out of your mouth to whoever it is, it's real. And having a feeling of uncertainty is very different to starting to say, I'm not happy in this relationship. I did a little bit around sort of looking after myself afterwards, had a lot of therapy, et cetera, and that's massively helped me. But I really wish also that I'd listened and been more responsive to my emotions and tapped into them more. And actually in those early days, I really let that build, because I thought if I don't feel it, it's not real. And actually that just doesn't work. You just end uphill. Whereas actually what I wish I'd done is I really wish I'd listened to my body more. I really wish I'd listened to my emotions more, which is why when I'm with clients, I work so much around emotional awareness. It's got to be slow. It's got to be safe, and if somebody is really suffering with anxiety and stuff, then obviously I would tailor my approach for that, because it's scary. I'm sure you see that with clients that come in, that first conversation, it's really scary. There's a lot of fear based around this process, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a huge amount. And I think sometimes as well, because you are in that heightened sense, you don't take everything in the first time.
Yeah.
So sometimes actually it's a case of I need to reflect on it. And sometimes we'll have people, for example, that will bring a friend with them to their meeting.
That's a great idea.
Not necessarily for the friend to have any input during the conversation, but just to have a second pair of ears so that after the conversation, you can debrief, if you like, over a coffee and be like, do you remember what they said about this? Or did you interpret this the same way that I interpreted it? And sometimes they might have pulled something out of the conversation that you hadn't heard because you were concentrating on the thing that had been said in the paragraph beforehand.
Of course.
So it's really difficult for people to be able to take that information in sometimes.
Yeah, and like you just say, if you're very stressed and anxious, you're not thinking straight. I mean, you're not thinking straight. You're in there's fight, flight, freeze, fawn, there's all sorts of different stress responses. And just as kind of this process is not linear in terms of decision making, you will come in and out of those different stress responses. And that ultimately affects how you process information. And particularly, I think, when you've been in that state for a long period of time. So I remember at the time I really struggled with my focus. I really struggled with my concentration. I really struggled to kind of not do daily tasks because I just did what I was used to doing. But I definitely felt it in the way that I thought about things. And when we did come to separate, I just didn't deal with it. I just didn't think anything through. Now I really wish that I'd done that differently, because I think actually taking a friend, having a coach, I go to solicitor's appointments with clients and stuff because particularly clients that are suffering in abusive relationships, because they are not, they just can't absorb the information. And like you said, if you go for that debrief for the coffee, it's amazing sometimes the difference in terms of having somebody there in a much calmer, less triggered, less, at the end of the day, I'll always work and support my clients, but this is their life. This is their children that they're talking about, or this is their pension or their financial security they're talking about. Whereas I don't come with that emotional trigger or that emotional connection. And like you say, you've been a family lawyer for a long time. There's a lot to take in.
Yeah, there's
a lot to take in,
There's a huge amount to take in, but it's like we were talking about the steps. Like I was talking about the staircase. I think at the beginning, you can catastrophize and you can think about what are all the worst possible outcomes that could happen if I make this decision.
Yeah.
But actually, they probably won't happen. They are a possibility. We can't get away from that, but they most likely will not happen. You will be all right at the end of it. And it's about taking those first initial steps.
Yeah.
So speaking to somebody, first of all, like if you're having physical reactions, like talk to your GP, talk to a divorce coach or seek some therapy, get some legal advice, find out actually what the process is and what it will look like if you go through a divorce in these circumstances, and really kind of dig deep on, I'm going to do all of my research, because actually a lot of the anxiety can sometimes just come from the unknown.
Yeah.
And if we start to answer some of these questions and we take it one step at a time rather than panicking at what's at the top of the staircase, we can feel that those are much more manageable things.
Yeah, definitely. And, you and I have done this podcast for a long time, haven't we? And that's often people's top tip, isn't it? Is slow down.
Yeah.
You've got to take time to process all of this. When I'm working with clients in this stage in particular, I can't talk about hope for the future or anything like that because they're just not even at that stage, But, it's not, I think the most important thing at the uncertainty stage is definitely educate yourself, get as much information as you can, but also really take the time to get your foundations in place. It's basic. We all know we need to do this. Sometimes we don't do it, sometimes particularly when we're in moments of stress, but eat well, get as much sleep as you can. I totally appreciate that's not always possible. Go to the doctors if you're having health issues, get some counselling, get some support, talk to a trusted friend, because it's really difficult to make a decision from a really anxious, triggered place. It's back to that, you're not thinking properly. I always say to people when we're looking at things like resilience for the road ahead, get your foundations in place first, and then we can build on it step by step, slowly, and get them to actually understand themselves, understand what's happening to them, understand what they want to do. If somebody's if they've come to see you or they've come to see me for the kind of first appointment and they're incredibly anxious, I can't say to them, right, well, let's visualise what the future's going to be like, because they just see dark and depths of despair, because it feels so uncomfortable. As humans, we don't, like everyone says they like change, but we don't actually really like change that much. We're creatures of habit. We build routines, and ending a relationship can dramatically change all of those routines. So yeah, I think that's another key point for people in this situation is if it feels so fearful and terrifying, sitting there thinking about how wonderful it'd be is not going to help. It's almost like go right back to the beginning. Look after yourself. Take care of yourself. Treat yourself as you would treat a friend. That's often what I say to clients who are in this stage. You know, how would you treat a friend that was going through this? And their answers are always lovely. Well, I'd really look after them and I'd make sure that they were taken care of. And I was like, so why are you being so hard on yourself? Why are you sort of saying it's your fault or whatever, fault, blame, whatever? At the end of the day, it's about making sure that you choose the right life for you. And that can be in the relationship as much as it's not in the relationship as well.
So you were talking about that you'd worked with clients that had taken, again, a significant number of years in some circumstances. So with the work that you've done and your experience, would you say that there is kind of a tipping point or a common straw that breaks the camel's back, if you like, of going from being in this period of uncertainty to a decision being made one way or another?
Yeah, everybody's relationship and situation is different. Everybody's family is different. So the thing that I see the most is when that disconnection has turned into indifference, when somebody stops trying, when they don't want to fix it. They don't want to bring it up. They don't want to have that walk in the conversation because there's no point. I see that a lot in clients. It's that kind of like, I haven't got the energy to do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. And I will often sort of say to clients, is the question here, can I fix this? Or is the question, do you want to fix it? And when you get to the stage that you don't want to fix it, that I find is something that's incredibly difficult for people to come back from. You can rebuild disconnection in whatever way works for you. And that's down to your relationship and your partner and everything else. I've seen friends' relationships come back from huge periods of disconnection. But ultimately with them is that they wanted to fix it. And I think when somebody is in that two minds, that kind of powerful question about do you want to fix it even is actually something that's really powerful and can actually then sort of help people kind of look at the direction that they want to go in.
Kind of just reframes it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's funny how very similar question, but just slightly different wording to it. And it can give you a completely different answer.
Completely different answer because we can't do whatever we want. I don't agree with that mantra that we can do whatever we want because we can't do whatever we want. You know, I'm never going to climb Everest. But can is a sort of like, it's a very practical action driven word, isn't it? Whereas I want clients to say, do you actually want that? There's going to be a lot of hard work, a lot of difficult conversations, you know, to rebuild that relationship. But also as well, you know, do you want to get divorced? You know, it's that kind of, do you want to fix it or not?
So if you've got somebody that's in this situation, that in the uncertain period at the moment, can we finish with what would your number one top tip for them be?
Oh, I've always probably got about 3 every time I think about top tips. I think my number one tip would be, well, there's take your time, which is obviously is often the number one tip for all of us, isn't it, when we're doing these sessions? But I think my main message to people is really get under the skin of how you actually feel first. Really spend some time naming your emotions, you know, do it in whatever way you need to do it at whatever pace you want to do it. Am I scared? What am I scared of? Am I lonely? Why am I lonely? There's a really useful kind of emotional wheel. So it's got the core emotions in the middle and you can get free versions off the internet. It's not something that you need to see a therapist or a coach for. But what it does is it drills down those key emotions. So if you're really struggling to kind of verbalize where you are, I had one client back to that loneliness feeling. He was incredibly lonely and I was incredibly lonely when I went through that process. But actually what I was feeling was disconnection. There's also as well, I think it's 101 Essays That Will Change Your Life. It's a book.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's a really, really good chapter in that about the power of emotions and what our emotions are trying to tell us. Sadly, I didn't have that at the time, but I've read that sort of subsequently, and that kind of really helped me kind of sort of join the dots. This is what I'm feeling. This is when I'm feeling it. But why? And then you can start to fix the why.
Brilliant. Well, Kate, obviously been working with the podcast since the beginning, but it has been so lovely to have you behind the microphone at last.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.